start the meeting. I'll call to order the Finance Committee meeting of today, whatever date that is. And I don't have an agenda in front of me, so Mr. Pease, first of all, is there anybody in the audience who wants to speak on something that's not on the agenda? All right, then failing that, Mr. Pease, what's up? What's first up?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, committee members. On today's agenda is the presentation of general fund fees, continuing the review of the proposed two-year financial plan. General fund departments will be presenting the significant changes in their fees. And then following that, we'll have a discussion of the proposed expansion of the facilities energy program. So with that, we'll start off with fire department.
Good afternoon.
Yes, I'm Ron Lichty, Fire Department's Administrative Services Manager. I'm here to talk about the proposed changes to Fire Department's fees for fiscal year 18. And how I'd like to start the discussion is looking at our revenues in total.
Is your mic on? There you go.
Looking at our revenues, there we go. They're looking at revenues in total, and our revenues, this table shows our revenues, and overall for fiscal 18, we're proposing for revenues a 3.5% increase, and most of this increase is due to that first line, the first row, interfund reimbursement, which is our ARF charges primarily. And so our revenues are going up about $130,000 we expect this year's budget from last year's budget. But today we want to focus on fees and service charges. And those fees and service charges constitute about 5% of the fire department's revenues. And in fiscal year 18, we're actually proposing a $17,000 reduction or 8% reduction to these fees. This slide shows fire department's fees in more detail, categorized by type of fee. The fire department is increasing our fee rates 3% across the board. We charge fees based on cost recovery model, and according to our costs, they increase 3% from year to year. We're projecting increases to all our fee revenues except for engine company fire inspections, which is our first row there. And the reason why that went down is that we're removing about 2,000 fire inspections from the inspection rolls. These are 15-minute commercial property, small occupancy fire inspections. And to offset the loss of those inspections, and in keeping with the goals of the prevention program, the fire department is starting to implement a building shell inspection, inspecting the whole shell of the building and the occupants rather than each individualized unit. The shell inspection allows us to maintain the goals of the inspection program, but it reduces the amount of overprescribed work and undue burden on the commercial occupancies. And it does keep with the spirit of regulations as provided in the California Fire Code, and it does not reduce our prevention or safety. I just have one more slide, and this is just some sample rates that we're increasing. Now, there's a 3% change and rounded to the nearest whole dollar. And this, as an example, the first row, apartments and hotels, units, 3 to 9 units for a quarter-hour inspection went from $27 to $28, and that's one of our most popular fees. The one change to our fees is the shell inspection, and for the building entirety, we'll be charging $75 this year. So we believe we have a robust fire inspection program, and I'm looking forward to this change. And that's my presentation for today. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to take them.
Thank you. Do you have any questions?
The change in this inspection regime, is that something that's come to council already or that we're going to see again, or is this our only exposure to this?
We're going to be presenting at our budget meeting next week. The fire marshal will be talking about it a little bit more there. And I thought that had gone to council once already, but
I think it may have come up in the code
Yes.
amendments. But I was just curious, but maybe I'll wait and save questions for the marshal on this.
That'd be a good idea. Okay.
Yeah, I would like to hear more about it as well. I'm not quite clear on how that's going to work, and sounds like I don't understand how that's going to be a reduction, how that isn't going to be a reduction in the quality of inspection service. So perhaps you could pass that back to your team to back that up a little bit more with the
Absolutely.
hows and whys of that.
Sure.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks.
Okay, next up is library.
So, good afternoon, Chair, committee members. I am Norma Cervantes, the Administrative Analyst at the library. Today I will be presenting the proposed fee changes for the library. And we'll start off with the user fees, which are for items such as copies, printouts, unreturned, lost materials, and other fees and services that the library provides to its users. So we're proposing fees and printouts to increase by 5 cents each. And the unreturned or lost materials are mostly decreasing because we would like to standardize fees and make replacement costs realistic to current market price. Currently, the library allows users to purchase replacements of items that are lost or damaged. The staff time to manage the account replacing the item and then processing of the item is greater than the loss of money due to decreasing the costs. If these fees are adopted, the library will no longer allow users to submit replacement copies. This will reduce workload and be a net cost savings. The other fees on this slide are the fees and services that are increasing are the obituaries, general research, headphones, flash drives, and that is in an effort to recoup the staff and materials costs. So the next one is the meeting room proposed fee changes. And the last time that the library made any fee changes around the use of the meeting rooms was fiscal year 14. We are proposing the changes to the fee schedule to be a Monday through Thursday and a Friday through Sunday schedule, which you'll see there. And you'll also see the increase by $50 for the Faulkner Gallery and $20 for the side galleries. We're also proposing to add the lower plaza, which is in the area between the library and the museum. In our fee schedule, because we have received requests to book rent the area and have not been able to do so because it is not on our fee schedule. So the addition to the fee schedule would allow for at least a couple of rentals and some added revenue, which in the past has had to be turned away. So, and we would also like to eliminate the literacy center and the tech space from the fee schedule because we have built a lot of library programs around the rooms, which make it difficult to have open for public use. The literacy center is always busy with tutors, classes. The tech space is always in use by staff for in-house trainings and for other programs such as Makerspace, Coding Club, etc. So then the next fee schedule slide is just for the Friday through Sunday schedule, which increases from $50 for the Faulkner Gallery and $5 for the East and West. Then the next slide is our gallery space. So the library, we have 3 gallery space rentals, and it's for the wall space for local artists. We are proposing that the rental fee for the gallery space be increased by 25% for each gallery space approximately. The gallery space rental fee for the library charges for exhibiting is minimal in comparison to other galleries because the other galleries charge a rental fee and a percentage of all sales. So that's all we have, and we are also proposing that all of the fees be rolled out by January to give enough time to the community and give enough notice to everyone. So that's it. Any questions?
Thank you. Questions?
I have questions regarding the copy fees.
Okay.
Can you explain a little more about this change?
The copies and printouts. So we're increasing them by 5 cents in order to try to recoup costs for the actual machine rental and actual supplies and toner and be more in line with other places.
Do you have some reason to believe that increasing the price will increase revenues versus people printing less?
We do think that it would increase revenue. Currently, people usually pay with like dollars instead of change, so it wouldn't really change much. But so I guess I can look further into it.
And are these copies and printouts, I'm wondering, are these students who are printing things for school? Is it community members printing things for personal needs? What's kind of the breakdown of who's printing things out?
I
And
guess-
I'm really just concerned about making sure there's a high level of accessibility for people who this might be their only resource outside of Kinko's.
Yeah, so I'm not in. We don't take like any stats on that, but from what I see, it just depends. It's people on the computers, people actually coming in as library community members that are actually just making copies of things that they have or printing out actual like boarding passes or things of the sort. So it just would depend on what is needed.
Is there something we could do for students, like have a student price or a student maybe bulk card, or have schools maybe can have a program for their students?
Well, we could look into that.
Okay. Just seems, because it is a pretty dramatic increase. It's a 50% increase. And I know one page at a time, it doesn't seem like a lot. But from a student who's really academic and really printing up a lot of stuff, I think this could be detrimental.
Okay.
And then I had a question regarding the meeting room changes, kind of looking at it from the same way of is there accessibility for some of the less well-funded community groups? Is there a possibility to maybe have a community day once a week or once a month where there's a reduced rate, like maybe there's an off night, a Monday or Tuesday that you don't normally have the room scheduled? Is there a program we could have, like a lottery for nonprofits, or what else could we do to make sure that it remains accessible yet at the same time increase revenues if that's the goal?
Well, currently the room is booked most of the time. It's really hard to even get our programs in there as a library. So we're competing with the actual organizations to get to use our own room for library programs. But we can definitely look into if there is off nights and potentially have a different fee schedule if you would like, but we would have to definitely look into that.
Maybe even probably not the holiday itself because you may be closed, but the days before and after holiday may be lower usage. But I'd like to see something like that. If you think that there are groups who are going to be price sensitive, if you haven't had that experience where people are asking, is there a lower rate, then maybe this isn't. Maybe we're not at the level where it's going to be an impediment. But again, it's a pretty dramatic increase, $50. That's almost a 50% increase. So those are my questions. Thank you.
Of course.
On the gallery space fees, that's for what time frame are? It says $500 for.
So the gallery space chair and council board members. So the actual it's for the entire month because it's a wall space.
It's a month's fee.
Yeah.
Okay. And then what's the total? How much revenue comes in on all the fees?
All the fees for both the meeting rooms and the fines and
the
fees.
the library system. What is this whole thing generating in the way of total?
I don't have
revenues?
the exact number with me,
Ballpark.
but I think just from fees and just the meeting rooms, it's $35,000 that we always
Total.
typically get.
Total. Great. Thank you.
No problem.
Okay. Hand off now.
All right, thank you.
in process.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you.
Okay, next up is community development. Community development is up next. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and committee members. Renee Brooks, City Planner. I'll be going through the proposed changes to the planning division fees, and then Larry Cassidy I'll hand off to him to talk a little bit about changes in building and safety fees. So overall for community development, each year we take a look at our fees and assess how much we could or should raise them. We typically range in raising them from about 2 to 3% each year. You'll recall last year we had quite a bit of discussion on planning division fees and our cost of recovery. You did at that time recommend to council that certain fees do increase more than 2 or 3%, and we did that last year. So at this point, it's a rough estimate, but we do estimate we're recovering about 35% of the cost to provide our services, and the general fund is subsidizing the rest of that. Building and safety is at 100% full cost recovery, how they charge their fees. So this year for planning, we are proposing a 2% increase in most line items with very few exceptions to that. We're not changing our staff hourly rate. That's a fee that we charge for miscellaneous work, other services we provide, and we don't raise that every year, or else we would get out of line with our actual costs to provide that service. Same with those fees that are under $100. A 2% increase at times, rounding figures, can get out of line if we did that every year. A significant change, though, based on council direction last fall, was to increase the type of noticing that we do for development projects. And so beginning in July, we'll notice not only property owners within 300 feet of development projects, but the tenants as well. And so with that, per council's direction, to make it full cost recovery, we'll be increasing that fee for mailed notices by 74%, so that you'll see that significant change in our fee resolution. Quickly, just on building and safety, their fees would increase by 2% in most line items, except for 2 very minor ones, where they want to still incentivize people getting permits for these types of inspections, so there'll be no change to electrical generator fees and festival wiring. In planning, we do have a couple of new fees and a few clarifications for the most part. One new fee that we have in our resolution is, in some instances in the municipal code, there are decisions that the chief of building safety makes that are appealable to the planning commission. We never had a fee actually called out for that, so we're proposing a fee that's in line with our other appeal fees, $250 for someone to do that. We also have not, to this point, had a minor coastal development permit fee that doesn't require a public hearing, and that's specific to one application type. It's accessory dwelling units in the coastal zone that still require a coastal development permit, but they don't require a public hearing. So it's this odd duck that's in between in terms of staff resources. It doesn't require the same amount of resources as a typical coastal development permit. So we wanted to create a minor fee that was representative of the amount of staff and staff hearing officer time associated with those permits. We're also adding in a new fee for Mills Act related requests. So we have a fee when a property owner wants to enter into a Mills Act contract, and that's a benefit that someone gets from having a historic property and they want to upgrade their historic property. They get a property tax break for doing that. The city staff processes those contracts each year, and there's a cap. The property can only be valued at $1.5 million in order to qualify for that contract, but there's an allowance for council to grant an exception to that. We hadn't had a fee in the last couple of years for someone who wants to request that exception, but there is time involved in preparing the staff report and presenting that to council. So we are proposing a $480 fee for owners that want to request an exception to that property valuation maximum. We also just had some sort of textual clarifications, not really changes to fees in the resolution, making it clear that if an applicant wants to appeal a staff's determination about whether an application is complete or incomplete, we're clarifying that that appeal is to the Planning Commission. That was never clearly stated in the resolution. Also, a clarification about initial study fees when a development requires preparation of initial study. It wasn't clear exactly. There was room for improvement in terms of clarifying what fee the consultant or what fee the developer was charged. A pre-application review team fee, we're clarifying in the text of the resolution that that fee, which is not proposing to change other than increase by 2%, only affords the applicant one round of review. Just, again, a clarification point there. And we are revising a newer fee that we added last year is a design review pre-application consultation. We're again clarifying that allows the applicant one consultation at the design review board. It's quite a reduced fee in order to get that quick check-in with the design review board on a conceptual development proposal. And we're proposing that small fee no longer be applied as a credit towards a future application. And then I'll hand it off to Larry for the last couple of slides here.
May I ask a question while you're here?
Sure.
Okay. First of all, the pre-application review team fee with one review. What happens on review 2?
We would charge the fee again.
Okay, so it's just a repeat. And then was the ADU coastal zone non-hearing process, was that baked into the legislation? Is that how that got there? Was it in this?
Prior to the recent state law regarding accessory dwelling units, we still had same process for those, what was in our municipal code, we call them secondary dwelling units. When we had one proposed that might not have otherwise triggered any other discretionary review, but because it's in the coastal zone, it needed a coastal development permit. The process for those wouldn't change. We still do a staff report and make the staff hearing officer makes a finding at a hearing, but doesn't hold a public hearing. It's a bit of an odd process. So nothing in the state law changed that process because the state legislation did not change its relationship to the Coastal Act. But we had been charging the fee we were charging was not representative of the staff time spent doing that because we didn't have one that really addressed that type of coastal processing.
So there was before a non-hearing coastal development permit process.
Yes.
And the accessory dwelling unit was added to that as for that basket of permits.
Correct. So what we have in our municipal code referred to as secondary dwelling units is superseded now by the accessory dwelling unit legislation that recently passed, but it would go through the same process in the coastal zone. So nothing in that legislation changed the permit processing in the coastal zone.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any other questions?
Yes,
Councilmember Dominguez?
thank you. The general 2% increase in most line items, and it says no change for staff hourly rate. So my concern is we haven't completed our latest round of labor negotiations, but I know in the budget it was budgeted at 3%. So it looks like the gap between our expenditures and our revenues is growing. And not in the good way. We're actually going to be incurring more cost as our staff cost goes up, and we're recouping less of that. And the 3%, assuming that it comes in somewhere near there, on top of that, there's a CalPERS or some benefits. I'm not sure if that's in addition to the 3%, but it seems like we're losing ground. So what's the reasoning behind the modest 2% increase and then some of these no changes? It seems to me we should be, at the very least, taking what our increase in cost for staff time is as a baseline and then adjusting from there.
Committee Member Dominguez, let me clarify. In the current proposed two-year financial plan, we have a 1% assumption for the just salaries, and you're correct, there is an additional cost for PERS on top of that and benefits.
Where does 1% come from? I'd love to have only a 1% increase.
It's a budgetary assumption. We don't have any negotiated agreements with all the bargaining units yet, but we need to make some early assumptions, and so it seems reasonable based on where the revenues are going. You know, they're flattening out. We can't support more than that, and so we put 1% in the current proposed two-year financial plan. But you're correct. In the current year, there was a 3% assumption in the current year budget for fiscal year 17. Just to clarify.
So is there anything we can do to bring this up to 3%? And then the ones that say no change, can we make those 3% as well? What would be the consequences of that?
Mr. Chair and Committee Member Dominguez, if your question is about those fees under $100 where we have no change as well.
And the 2%, why isn't it 3%?
That question I can't answer. We were told to assume 2%.
You understand my basic concern is every year our costs are creeping up, but then if our fees aren't creeping up to match those, we're just increasing the deficit.
Right. So Bob Samario, Finance Director, says Mr. Pease indicated we give direction early on to departments about how to raise fees, and it's really about how to raise revenues overall in their departments. And they can play with the individual fees up or down depending on what they want. But the goal is to generate 2% more revenue. At least that was the direction. And that was based on the fact that we assumed in the next 2 years a 1% salary increase. Total compensation will be probably in the order of 2%, but we said because it's a 1% salary increase, let's adjust revenues and for departmental revenues 2%. If we had the 3% assumption built in for the next 2 years for salaries, we would be asking departments to bring in a 3 or 4% revenue increase as well. So we try to align those two things. So I think they are kind of aligning in most cases between the cost to provide the services and the revenues that they're generating. They can't do it in all cases because for some fees, or if you start raising them too much, you're going to actually lose revenue because you're going to lose participation. So you have to balance that, particularly in community development. When you want to encourage folks to come in and use those services, you don't want to price them out where they're not coming in and using the services, and then we start losing revenue. But that's always that balancing act. But I think, generally speaking, we're sort of balanced going forward, lining the fee increases with the expected increases in compensation.
So would there be a harm in changing the staff hourly rate 2%?
Sue Gray, Business Manager in Community Development. I do a calculation every year for the staff hourly rate, and when we change it a certain percent every year, it kind of gets skewed a little bit. What I do is I take the amount budgeted for the fiscal year coming up, so fiscal year 18 salaries that are in the budget, and I do a full cost recovery from our last fee study. We have a formula that we use, and I use certain positions in planning for it. And it comes up that we're pretty much right on right now. So we could raise it a little bit. I wouldn't raise it 2%, though, not for this year. Last year, I think we raised it a little higher.
So the formulation you just recited, does that include the retroactive pay raise, assuming that the negotiation's completed?
No, it does not include that. It
Okay.
includes all of the overhead, though. Yeah, it does not include that.
Well, wouldn't that be captured by the previous level? Because the assumptions from administration was to increase fees to match the previous budgeted amount.
Yes,
so
it
that would have been
includes-
captured in last year's fiscal year.
Yes, whatever Mr. Peace put in for what he's assuming for fiscal year 18, that's the figure I used.
Right. In this
I
case,
took-
we're going backwards, and that base already exists. So I think that's what Councilmember Dominguez is getting to, is that it's already cooked into the base that you're looking at for
Correct.
the calculations you just described.
Yes.
So your fiscal year 18 costs, the salary base you're looking at, that number you're including the potential 3% raise?
Yes.
Okay, I thought you said you weren't including that.
Well,
in there. You were
I'm
looking at our
including-
past salaries, which don't have that.
No, I was including fiscal year 18 budgeted salaries. So if that includes the 3% retroactive, then yes, it is included.
Yeah, basically you were including what was in the multi-year forecast.
Yes.
Our status quo.
Right.
Okay. Yeah. So
You actually looked at a forecasted salary range, not last year's actual.
Correct. We
Okay.
get a spreadsheet, a position control report for the budgeted year coming up, and that's the figure I used.
Okay.
The figures.
That's a little more reassuring. Thank you.
Councilmember White?
When should we make comments, Mr. Chair? Should we do that as we have each one of the?
Yeah, it's probably easier than trying to hold on to them. So,
Back to
yeah,
them.
go ahead.
Okay,
and
thank you.
While we
Yeah,
get the folks
I
up
just wanted
here.
to put in, I think it's kind of a repeat every year that I advocate for getting closer to full cost recovery on the planning fees. I just think that's to sort of repeat again sort of my total picture of how this should work is that fees ought to be like interest rates and go up when things are hot and go down when things are not. And so I just am definitely philosophically feel like we ought to get closer to how our neighbors perform, which is to have much closer to full cost recovery on planning fees.
Mr. Buell, it looks like you wanted to say something.
Yes, Mr. Chair, Committee Member White, George Buell, Community Development Director. We agree with you, and we have reserved some money in this year's budget as well as identified money in next year's budget to together pay for a comprehensive fee study that will tell us what our cost of service is and where fees should be. And once we have that information, we anticipate starting that after mid-year. So we need to get through the new zoning ordinance process. We need to get through launching our permit tracking software. Once we get through those milestones, we'll have capacity with staff and also funding in place to do that study, and then we'd be coming back to council at some point after the study is concluded with recommendations.
So that in order to do this, we need to have that our defensibility comes out of these studies, and that was part of what the Housing Task Force weighed in on. Was that study that came out of them? No.
Not particularly that study, but that will inform what fees will be for AUD type projects, and so it does have an effect on the cost of building an AUD project, for example, but it's not the nexus or economic studies that we're looking at in the context of that committee.
But it is a necessary component of being able to get closer to full cost recovery is to have this study.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You're welcome. Any other comments or questions? Councilmember Dominguez?
So I just want to reconcile these two slides. So on one slide it says planning approximate 35% cost recovery, excluding long-range planning, and then what I thought I heard was we are achieving cost recovery with our hourly rate. So there must be another basket of goods and services that we're not achieving cost recovery on.
Yes, on the fees that we charge for services related to going through design review, going through planning commission appeals, for example, we know that we believe that we're well under cost recovery with respect to those fees. And that would be precisely what we'd be wanting to better understand as we go through a fee study.
So until you do the fee study, is it possible to ratchet it up 5%, 10%?
I would get uncomfortable going much above, I would say, 5%, just because we don't know exactly where we're at, and also I don't know where we're at with regards to the market. As Finance Director Samario mentioned, we do like to encourage lawful behavior, and to the extent that we start to ratchet the fees up where they're out of range for people or beyond what people would consider reasonable, we may see people launching into illegal construction and that type of activity that makes it very difficult on the enforcement side.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Go right ahead.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, committee members. Larry Cassidy, Building and Safety Inspection Supervisor. Just want to cover the last few remaining slides for Building and Safety. First item on the list there is eliminations of tables A and C. That may not make a lot of sense to you, but previously our fees for new structures or remodeled structures or shells were based on type of construction, which comes down to there's three types. One is fire resistive, that would be, it would be non-combustible, that was table A. Table B was fire resistive or 1 hour construction, and table C was non-rated. But in hindsight, we started looking back and realizing that separating it out and having three tables was kind of not helping us gain our cover our time for review. Basically, regardless of type of construction, it takes about the same amount of time for review or inspection. So we've consolidated those tables just to simplify it. The next item, temporary certificate of occupancy. We've added this new fee to cover our expenses for the time it takes to process and follow up on temporary certificates of occupancy, also known as TCOs. You might hear that term thrown out. Oftentimes, businesses will get a temporary C of O, and unless they have some sort of incentive to come back in and close that TCO out and get their final C of O, oftentimes they do not do that. So this will encourage them to almost self-regulate and get them to take care of their own business instead of us having to go asking them to, hey, please call for your final inspection and get your C of O. So this will help eliminate the time we spend trying to follow up on the TCOs. Last item there, conversion of paper plans to PDF. Looking forward, we're looking to go to paperless plan review, and sometime in FY18 we'll be in that world and stepping into it, not full time, but eventually we will, and that's going to necessitate an in-house conversion of paper plans to PDF. Many of the larger design firms and architectural firms are set up to do that, but some of the mom and pops and homeowners who do owner-builder projects, they're just not set up to do electronic drawings, so that they'll come in with the hard copies, and what we will do is convert those to electronic copies for them, and that will cover our cost to do that, provide that service for them. We've also changed the method for how we are going to charge investigation fees, and this will apply mostly to illegal construction. Typically, we've kind of used the formula put forth by the building codes years and years ago, probably 10 years ago is when we, in 2003, we added this fee to our fee resolution, and we haven't made any changes. This change will allow us to be more accurate in recouping our expenses for illegal construction. And with that, they've moved the Building and Fire Code Board of Appeals hearing and ratifications. So that takes place within the Building and Fire Code Board of Appeals, and we now have a charge for filing appeals. And that's it for building and safety. Any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Cassidy. Are there any questions? Councilmember Dominguez?
What is the new method of charging for investigations? You've left me intrigued.
Okay. I'll read from the fee reso, if you don't mind. It says investigation fees, including code enforcement, building, electrical, plumbing, mechanical, energy, accessibility, grading, requested site investigations, and any form of investigation not specifically associated with an active permit. So the investigation fee used to be 33% of the required permit fee to legalize that construction. We've changed that to say the total hours that the assigned inspector logged for acquiring access in the field investigation of the matter reported, and it's a minimum of 1 hour.
So you switched from a straight 33% of the permit to how many hours are actually spent in the field?
Correct.
And what is the cost for the hour per hour in the field?
I believe it is 3. I'll get that for you 1 second. $3.28.
And so in this situation, did you study which permits this might tend to disincentivize and which ones it would incentivize? In other words, I'm assuming this is going to raise and lower the cost in different areas, so an accessibility fee may go up if it takes longer or fewer hours, because there's a whole list of things you were talking about, electrical, plumbing, and some of them require more access if the builder has to remove some bricks, for example.
Committee member Dominguez, the investigation fee is for all construction that has taken place without, and it's not related to an existing permit. So it's basically unpermitted construction.
So for an as-built permit?
Correct. We could charge that fee for an as-built permit.
So again, is this going to increase the price? Is the overall revenue here going to go up or down?
The overall revenue we anticipate will go up, and it will allow us to collect fees for the unpermitted construction, basically.
So will this disincentivize people who've built without a permit from coming in and getting a permit?
I don't think that will have an effect on it. If they're going to perform work without a permit, I don't think the fee is going to change whether or not they're going to do work without a permit. It will only allow us to recoup our expenses once we discover it through code enforcement or other plan check that takes place where we're planning or building through a site visit might see that something has been constructed without a permit. So I don't think it will disincentivize people to come in, but it will assist us in being more accurate in our cost recovery for that work.
So what are the areas within community development where raising fees would discourage people? That's something that seems like maybe there's some inconsistencies in our perspectives.
Yeah. Whenever we look at fees for building and safety, there are a few permits that sometimes we do raise, or there's actually, like this year, there are 2 fees that we did not raise, and those were electrical generators and
Festival wiring,
festival wiring.
which I don't know what that is.
So the festival wiring, let me clarify that, is it's everything not related to the generator. In other words, the distribution system or anything that's not related to the generator. So like at the De La Guerra Plaza, they have all these, they call them spider boxes, where you plug in the electrical cords and you can extend the access for electric power throughout De La Guerra Plaza. That is what we consider festival wiring.
Okay. So going back to whether or not this incentivizes or disincentivizes folks, in my, I'm not a contractor, so I'm not sure how the economics work specifically, but seems like they'd be less inclined to pay a permit fee or an inspection fee if they felt it was disproportionate to the amount of work they're attempting to achieve. It seems like there's probably a fairness thing, or is it just straight in economics? Can they afford it?
Committee Member Dominguez, are you referring to the investigation fee now or fees in general, just to clarify?
Both, in general and with this particular. And if there's a difference, if one way is counterintuitive to the other manner, I'd like to hear about that too.
Committee Member Dominguez, I would say the investigation fee wouldn't have any bearing on whether or not someone's coming in. That's just to help us recoup our expenses once we do discover illegal construction. As far as the fees in general,
And that's because at that point, they don't really have a choice. You've engaged them in an enforcement process. So in the context we heard earlier, it may be someone who you're unaware of who tries to do something without getting a permit, and they may be more price sensitive, and that may be the reason why they're not coming in to get a permit.
correct.
Okay. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Cassidy. Any more questions or comments? Okay, thank you. Next item.
Okay, next up is Public Works.
Mr. Handel?
Good afternoon, Chair and committee members. I'm Adam Hendel, Principal Engineer in the Public Works Department. I'm here today to talk to you about proposed fee changes for engineering, land development, and transportation planning. We do have an increase recommended across the board to move us closer to full cost recovery. We also have a new fee for overtime inspection for outside of normal work hours. And that's primarily for public works construction that might involve night work, maybe a water line shutdown, something that we need to perform work at night to minimize inconvenience to the public. And this fee change would just reimburse the overtime expense for the city, $146 an hour. I'm recommending a reduction in the fee for what we call administrative encroachment permits for private or non-city standard elements in the public right-of-way from $608 to $488. A reduction in the cost of certificates of completion for agreements. And then an increased cost or fee for missed or rescheduling inspections from $40 to $123. What we find sometimes is an inspector will show up to the project and the contractor's not ready for inspection, and we've lost that hour or two of time, and so we're recommending an increase in that fee for cost recovery purposes. Next slide. For transportation planning, primarily related to parking design review, two recommended fee changes in line with some of the things they do in planning, which is for preliminary plan review prior to a design review submittal, charging half of the current plan check fee. And similarly, for supplemental reviews or reviews after the second review, if the applicant hasn't responded to comments, then a fee of a quarter of the current plan check fee. And I'm here to answer any questions you may have.
Any questions for Mr. Handel? Thank you for the presentation. Councilmember White?
Thank you. On the first slide that had fees on it, what would be your commonest one or two examples of administrative encroachment permits? What would be?
Committee Member White, an administrative encroachment permit is it's different than what we call a minor encroachment permit, and then it's not something that requires a recorded agreement on the property. In terms of what that might be, it would be a special type of driveway apron in the street where we need to review the materials, that it's not going to create an issue for the traveling public. It could be something in the parkway that the adjacent property owner wants to install in the parkway, and staff review that it doesn't create a traffic hazard or other issue in the public right-of-way. And so we call that an administrative encroachment permit.
Any other questions? Councilmember Dominguez?
So how did you come up with 3% across the board?
Councilmember Dominguez, the 3% across the board moves us closer to full cost recovery for Public Works Department.
Was it somehow related to the 3% budgeted for salaries, or is that just a coincidence?
It's just a coincidence.
Okay. And 124 during normal work hours and then proposed increase to 123. Are those different costs? Why is one 123 and one 124?
I don't think there's a correlation there between the hourly rate for inspection and the rescheduling fee. It's just a coincidence.
Okay, so it's not like we're saying if you miss your appointment, that's an hour of time and that's worth its...
Correct.
So why 123 and why not 125 or...
I would need to check and respond to that as to why it's not 122 or 125.
Okay. Thank you.
Would you rather it was 125 than 123? Okay, no other questions? Thank you, Mr. Handel.
Thank you.
Okay, our final fee presentation today will be Parks and Recreation.
Mr. Sewell, hi.
Hello, Chair Hart and committee members. My name is Mark Sewell. I'm the Parks and Recreation Business Manager. I have a short presentation for you today to just share with you the recommended fee changes for Parks and Recreation. So we have 617, a broad range of program and facility fees. 14 of those we're recommending for deletion. Those programs are no longer going to be offered. We have 13 new fees, and we're actually looking to change about 80% of our fees, leaving 18% unchanged. We have taken a view that typically if we're going to increase, it's around the 3% mark. We look at what the marketplace is doing. We have a number of fees where we're in a competitive market, and we try to make sure we still offer affordable programs. But we do also have some fees where we're looking to actually increase slightly higher where it's appropriate. So when we look at our fees, we obviously want to try to maximize our participation where possible. We do provide a number of community benefits, and we obviously need to make sure that we can still meet a broad section of the community with what we offer. In some cases, we're looking at specific audiences for the specific programs, and we look at the fees in that relation. As I said earlier, we are already competitive in a number of programs. There's a number of summer camps. There's many locations to book your wedding, your party. So we have to look at what other people are doing and try to stay competitive. And we have a reputation in the community for offering affordable and quality programs and services. So we bear that in mind as well as we're considering our approach. I haven't got a slide of 617 fees for you, so I just pulled out a few of them to just sort of share with you. The top line there in terms of drop-in fee, it's only $1, but typically can have a, $1 on a smaller fee is a large percentage. So sometimes when we think about, we're raising fees 10%, 15%, 7%, it can only often be $1. And so there you'll see where it's outside of the 3% range, but $1 we feel is appropriate. The Ceramic Youth Camp, 3%, but it turns into a slightly larger dollar amount because it's a larger camp, and that reflects some of the costs of actually providing that program. We are looking to increase our oversized picnic rental fee. We only have 5 of these in the city. These are areas within parks where you can have quite a lot of people, and it's just reflecting the higher maintenance costs associated with that larger and broader area. Westside kitchen rental, again, professional cleaning costs are increasing, and so a $2 increase per hour we feel is appropriate and won't adversely affect the current customers there. And then you can see for our lights, for our adult and youth ball field rentals, there are $2 and $1, but they then equate to an 8 and a 7%. And rather than having things which are 0.23, we like to have round dollars, and so that kind of is where it leaves us. And that, again, is reflective of water costs and turf renovation and maintenance costs, because those are very highly used assets in our community. And then finally, I've just pulled up there that we have taken an across the board approach, to our rental facilities, where we've looked to try and increase them by 3% to just, again, maintain our place in the marketplace and also be concerned and considerate of our cost base. One final slide for you. I just wanted to share with you these 4 fees were omitted from the fees and charges schedule, so that's why I wanted to pull them out specifically. 3 of them are new, and 1 of them is where we've relooked at it and are recommending an increase. So I'll just run through them very briefly. Upon the recommendation from the Arts and Crafts Advisory Committee, we are looking to see if we can generate some more arts and craft show members, and looking to see if we can attract some junior members, of which there might be an incentive for them if we can drop the fee. So there's a recommendation to have a fee for junior members, which is at half of the current fee for any other member, and that's on a 6-month or a 12-month basis. And then we are looking also to increase the fee for the Recreation After School program for the 10 drop-in pass. There are a number of ways in which children can attend those, and we have a 30-day pass, a drop-in fee, and this is the one which is in the mid-range. And so we're looking to, where possible, try to recover our costs for the program, and also encourage people, if they can, to look to buy the 30-day pass, and so that's where they see an economy of scale. And then our final fee is a new camp, where we are looking to offer a new program called Terrific Scientific.
Thank you, Mr. Sewell. Any questions, Councilmember White?
Yeah. Could you tell what are the 2 or 3 most the biggest revenue generators in terms of rentals for parks?
Chair Hart and Commissioner Councilmember White, the single biggest revenue generator from a rental standpoint, I would say, would probably be the Cabrillo Pavilion Arts Centre. It is booked 80% of the time on Saturdays, and Fridays and Sundays we're looking to try and encourage more and more bookings in that. That is probably the single biggest, and then we'd have, after that, a number of other smaller buildings, and then some of our park sites are particularly popular. We tend to have a large number of rental opportunities, which when you accumulate it adds up to quite a lot of money, but very few sort of very large single assets.
Thank you.
Any trends in rental business and use of city facilities? I notice anecdotally that there are a lot other competing private sector rental opportunities and venues and museums that are renting their space and things. How is that affecting the revenue generation from rentals?
So, Chair Hart, that's a very good question. Competition is ever increasing, in the particularly when it comes to rental of spaces. and demographics change over time. You know, we have a number of unique buildings which are fantastic and in wonderful locations. We're on the beach for the pavilion. We're downtown in the Korea Recreation Center, and we're in the neighborhoods for those people who want to celebrate there. But then you have the funk zone, and you have all these weird and unique and quirky things which are available. And so we're seeing that we're not the only game in town as we may have been a number of years ago. And so we're having to sharpen our approach to how we market to people and how we attract people. And I think there are areas where we are still very strong. And as I mentioned earlier, you know, Saturdays at the pavilion are very strong, and that's always a lot of demand for that. And so where we're seeing it more challenged is to try to fill up those shoulder days where there are just more opportunities for people now. And I mean, even the library today, we're talking about introducing new fees to attract people to hold, you know, events in the outdoor locations of the library. And so, you know, we have a number of parks where we do that sort of thing as well. So I think a lot of people are looking at opportunity to grow revenue. So that clearly challenges us to keep people wanting to think about us first.
And just using that as an example, do you have a different fee for the Fridays and Sundays as opposed to the Saturdays at the?
So within the fee schedule, we don't have a different fee at this time, but what we do is offer promotions for those Fridays and Sundays. And so there's a current live promotion at this point in time, whereby in certain buildings on certain days, there's a percentage discount off of the standard fee, recognizing that, of course, demand and supply affects everyone, and we want to try and encourage people to take that Friday and that Sunday if we can incentivize them to do so.
Got it. Great. Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Councilmember Dominguez?
So how much is the 30-day drop-in pass?
Councilman Dominguez, I can tell you that the 30-day drop-in pass is $5.50 a day. I think it's $165.
Okay.
And so then when you would compare that to the 10, it's almost half the cost per session that you would get for the 10-day pass. And if you were to just drop in, it would be $12 a session.
So it's not much of an incentive for the 10-day pass, 20% discount.
Yes, I guess you could look at it that way.
So my concern there would be for a family that either couldn't afford the 30-day pass or just wasn't going to be able to use it, that we'd still have a higher level of participation. So that's just something I'd bring up. I'm not sure if there's an answer, but
Councilman, I do have an answer to that. We actually have in our general fund recommended budget this year, and we've had it in the prior years, $50,000 for scholarships for that program, for that intent. And so our staff receive those applications and review those and either offer somewhere between 25 to 100% scholarship on a needs basis for that program.
And you utilize the full 50,000?
We do, absolutely.
Okay. So going back to your initial slide, 3% is typical for the increases. Again, with apologies to De La Soul, 3% is the magic number here. I note that's true for your rental and lease rates, which obviously wouldn't be tied to wages because it's a whole different scenario. Where did the 3% come from?
So typically, our strategy is to try to have a regular but modest increase in fees over time, to try to avoid the need to, at certain points, 2 or 3 years, have a large sort of shock to people, and because obviously costs are forever increasing. But particularly in the area of rental, as we talked about earlier, it's a particularly competitive environment. So we can't just be willy-nilly putting whatever number we want in there because it will make it more difficult for us to then sell that venue. So again, our strategy is to try to look at it and do a little bit often so that we never have to have that huge 10, 20% jump because people will be used to paying X for that building, and suddenly next year it's a lot higher.
Right, you want it to creep up, not all of a sudden
Correct.
escalate. Do you do surveys after different programs and collect input? I mean, obviously, not only on the program, but in terms of the costs or price.
So, Councilman Dominguez, we do, after all of our summer programs and camps, that's our busiest time, offer all of the participants an opportunity to give us their feedback via a survey. I'm not so sure whether we exactly say, does this give you value for money, or how do you feel about the fee? Certainly that's a question which would be of value, and I can certainly confirm to you what that survey would look like. We tend to look at the performance of the camps at the end of the summer, and if there was really good participation, then we feel that the fee is okay, or is there room for it maybe to grow, based on all the criteria we talked about earlier. And if, of course, the participation was somewhat depressed, then we want to understand what are the reasons for that, and of course fee could be part of it.
Right. And being a teacher, I can tell you a lot of it is personnel related. So if you have a course with a new teacher who's dynamic and compelling, you're going to get a much higher participation level. So the price may be one point, but the other point would be the value in terms of who's leading the group and what the parents and the participants think they're getting out of it. I think that answers my questions. Thank you very much.
Councilmember White?
I know we'll have a Parks and Rec session later, but I'd appreciate hearing more about the scholarship and just how we're engaging our lower income folks in our recreation programs as part of that presentation.
I'll take that back.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sewell.
Mr. Chair, committee members, with that concludes our general fund fee presentation for today. Due to unanticipated circumstances, we will bring back the police fee changes at the next presentation next week when we talk about enterprise funds. Now, I will turn it over to Mr. Samario and Mr. Wiltshire to talk about the potential expansion of the facility energy projects.
Thank you, Mr. Peace.
Can I make one last comment on the last agenda item?
Yes, Councilman
Before we get started? So to me, one of the takeaways from today's presentations are different departments are using different methodologies to raise fees. I'd like to explore more about surveys, both with parks, community development, and I'd throw in the library too, to find out how sensitive users are to price increases. When one department isn't getting full cost recovery, it impacts the other department because you're all general fund departments. So I want to make sure that parks and police, which are very critical, at least in terms of what I'm hearing from residents in my district and citywide, aren't being shortchanged necessarily because another department isn't doing full cost recovery. So I just want to make sure we're keeping that in the backs of our minds as we move forward with this and how aggressive we are. At the end of the day, I want to make sure that all of our residents are getting good value for the money they pay for any of their services. So we want to make sure we're as efficient as we can be. And I think department heads know that part of their duties are to keep an eye on costs and to keep their departments efficient. So I'm comfortable there, but I want to make sure both of those principles are talked about, discussed within the departments, with us up here on the council during the budget work session. So I'm going to keep asking questions about how we can make sure our services are meeting the needs of our constituents and where some may be more price sensitive or shift demand curves more than others.
Thank you. Mr. Samario.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Bob Samario, Finance Director. So this item here is brought to you based on the request from our committee member Dominguez. The question was asked, are there opportunities for us to expand on our funding for projects where there is some energy gains and some savings longer term? So what we're going to do is Mike Wiltshire, who is the facilities manager, is going to give you a presentation, give you some background and kind of ground you on the program, what we're doing today, how it's funded, how it's intended to work, and then we can open up to the committee for any suggestions about potential expansion.
Thank you, Mr. Samario. Mr. Wiltshire?
Yeah, Chair Hart, committee members, as Mr. Samario said, my name is Mike Wiltshire. I'm the relatively new facilities and energy manager for the city. I'll give a brief review of the city's utility management program and how it pertains to energy efficiency projects. A little overview of what I'm going to present on what is the utilities management program, how is it funded, energy efficiency projects that it may generate, and the future of the program. The utilities management program was first established halfway through fiscal year 2016. So this year, FY 2017, will be its first full year of implementation. And what it does is the program centralizes the payment of general fund utility bills into a single program within the facilities division. Previously, these utility bills, gas and electric, were paid by individual programs, and they showed up as a budget line item within those programs throughout the city. Again, this program is only currently looking at general fund facilities and general fund utility bills. This does include citywide streetlights. Centralizing payment of the utility bills has a number of advantages. Bills are now being managed by our energy management staff as opposed to program heads who may or may not be focused on energy and energy efficiency. It kind of establishes one central point of contact for us and our utility representatives, SoCal Edison and SoCal Gas. And it kind of minimizes our lost or unpaid bill. Yeah, no problem. Kind of minimizes any lost or unpaid bills or late fees we have in paying utility bills because they all come through our this program now, and they're centrally managed. No problem, Bob. The utilities management program is fully funded by intracity allocated costs that are established during each 2-year budget cycle. This graph on the right, I didn't title it because it kind of captures two things. This was our 2017 allocated cost revenue, but it also kind of showcases our utility usage for general fund facilities because we try and match the allocated cost that we bring in to our utility usage. And we look at the past 2 years' utility usage to try and predetermine what the future years will be. And so this is our allocated cost revenue breakdown. One thing to note is FY 2018 and FY 2019 allocated costs within the budget amount will include a 3 to 5% increase over FY 2017, and this is to cover expected increases in gas and electric rates. It was intended that the program will be held harmless against outside price increases and inflation, so we try and capture those cost increases. The long-term aim of the program is to act as a revolving fund that rolls over any savings and incentives and rebates and anything that's coming in energy related and reinvest this into energy projects for the city. The program itself and staff are well suited to generate and identify these high quality energy efficiency projects. This is sort of a snapshot of where we're at for 2017. At last utility billing cycle, we were 75% through the fiscal year. So this kind of shows how the program funding is working. At 75% through the fiscal year, we've spent 73% of the electricity budget. So we're pretty much right on track there, although we kind of expect to see a little bit of an increase in May and June because of that increased air conditioning load. So we don't anticipate to see much savings for the electrical for FY 2017. But a good story is our gas usage. We're at 75% through the fiscal year. We've currently spent 44% of our gas budget. And so we've recognized dramatic gas savings from some past projects. One of the main projects was the HVAC replacement project at the police department. This was a $1.4 million full building HVAC retrofit that occurred and came into play at the end of 2015. So we're saving $30,000 to $40,000 a year in gas at that facility alone. So we plan, as of now, we're planning to see $50,000 to $70,000 in savings in the utilities management program, which will be rolled over to execute energy efficiency projects in FY 18. Some examples of energy efficiency projects. In FY 2017, as I mentioned, this was the initial year of the program, so we didn't have any rollover funds available for energy efficiency projects. The program was given a $25,000 one-time seed funding, which is currently being used to upgrade the street lighting circuit on Haley Street. So we're replacing the underground wiring and 53 streetlight fixtures between State Street and Milpas on Haley Street, and that's upgrading from high pressure sodium to LED. And in 2018, we're anticipating $50,000 to $70,000 in rollover savings, and so we kind of aim to address quick payback 1 to 3 year energy efficiency projects throughout the city. And here's a bit of a breakdown on the types of projects we have available within general fund facilities. So looking ahead, we still have a number of facilities within the city that can benefit from these quick payback projects. The main quick payback projects are interior lighting, exterior lighting. We are embarking on replacing streetlights citywide, but there will be some catch-all for that, so replacing some street lightings like onesie-twosie type stuff. The energy team could definitely utilize additional staffing to help meet some of these really quick payback stuff. They're a little more vague, but low-cost measures and behavioral changes, auditing, benchmarking, and field work. Having staff to execute these kind of projects often pay for themselves. So if you have somebody who's analyzing the 650 utility bills that we receive for peaks and troughs, you can do kind of real-time analytics and have them be out and available to go out in the field and address these things real-time. So we can see if some of our major users are spiking, we can address that. Future of the program. The Utilities Management Program is a great way forward. As I mentioned, it puts the control of utilities management and energy project development in the hands of the city's energy professionals instead of spreading it across the citywide. Allows proper direction and prioritization of energy projects with good payback. The energy team has direct access to our facilities project management staff along with our building maintenance staff, and so we have the means and tools to kind of execute these projects quickly and effectively. Something that should be noted is for the success of the program, we have to truly commit to rolling over the program savings so that they can be held for energy efficiency projects in the next years, because that really is a fundamental goal of the program, is to overall, over time, lower the city's utility usage by executing these energy efficiency projects. And as I mentioned, currently the program only covers general fund facilities. So you can see the pie chart on the right there. That's the City of Santa Barbara's electrical only. That's general fund and enterprise fund. So enterprise funds make up over 50% of the city's utility usage, and they currently don't fall under the management of the Utilities Management Program, but there's a huge amount of opportunity there for energy efficiency projects. And so finding a way going forward to, at minimum, review and manage the utility bills and help direct energy projects for enterprise funds would be a good way to go. And I think that's it. Yeah.
Thank you,
Questions?
Mr. Wiltshire. Councilmember White?
Thank you. Yeah, just that sounds like a opportunity to explore that area some more. I would think that, I mean, how would that work? The enterprise funds, I mean, and take the waterfront, for example. I mean, they have a finance team, a management team there, obviously. And then we have an energy management team for the general fund and so forth. How would you envision that overlapping or complementing one another? Or would you see that, for example, the waterfront, using that as an example, would they have their own energy management, utilities management program working in that little system, or not little system, but that independent system, or how would you see that working?
Yeah, and I'll let Mr. Samara speak on some of this too. I think the main concern is kind of the commingling of funds using we don't want to use general fund funding to pay for enterprise fund projects, so some way to delineate that. Mm-hmm. But I do like the idea of keeping the energy program centralized within a central program so that we can maintain the energy staff there and review all of these funds. So it would be finding a mechanism or a way to allow our energy staff to weigh in and support energy projects and programs within enterprise funds.
So that's how you would see it going, rather than the independent entities.
I'd think so.
Yeah, if I could add, so the enterprise funds were not included initially because, we recognize that enterprise funds have their own funding sources, and we can't really commingle general fund enterprise funds. We have to maintain them sort of distinctly. But that's not to say that Mr. Wiltshire and his staff couldn't be kind of as advisors, working as advisors to enterprise funds and encouraging these kinds of projects. They have their own funding sources. They all have their own reserves. So they can make it work. It's just a matter of putting more attention and focus into those kinds of projects. And with the expertise of Mr. Wiltshire and his staff, I think we can put more focus into those areas. For the general fund departments, we don't have that kind of money we could play with, so we're creating this little program that's self-financing to help develop some of these projects that benefit the general fund departments as a whole. We don't have to worry about monies from one department commingling with another. So that's kind of why we have this distinction. But it's possible to do so. It should be really more of an advisor capacity than really managing the money as well.
Yeah, this perhaps, and when we get into our budgetary conversations, we could look into this further. This sounds like an opportunity, a real opportunity to make some save money and energy and such. So hopefully we can get into that discussion with our in our budget conversations. Also, how do you spell Wilshire? Is that like Wilshire Boulevard?
Yeah, there's a T in there. WILTSHIRE.
Okay, thank you.
And if I could, I would, suggest that the committee at least provides, some direction to staff. If you want us to pursue something more within the general fund departments or enterprise funds, we can certainly bring back to you something as part of Public Works presentation in terms of how that might be funded. The funding question is really the critical issue here. How are we going to come up with the money? How do we make that work? I think there are some ways to make that happen. So we'd be happy to, receive any kind of direction or even questions about how that might happen today.
Well, it sounds like the threshold constraint is staffing. There's only you. And
Yeah, and Alelia Parento, our energy analyst, and then our capital project staff that can execute these projects. But yeah, that would be the limiting factor, is if we taking on an additional management of the enterprise funds we would have to figure out some way to increase our breadth to handle that.
And then, Mr. Smarty, do you have any thoughts on how that would be? Is that just like an overhead charge, conceivably, that the enterprise funds would be paying, a special energy overhead charge or something?
So, Mr. Chair, I would look to Mr. Wiltshire. I guess what he's indicating is that more staff would be needed, so we would have more staff, then we would charge them out somehow to enterprise funds to recover their time and costs.
And is that what you're proposing to cook and then bring back to us as part of this budget process, or do you want direction from
we're
us
just looking
to do
for
that?
Direction and for not just enterprise funds, but just in general, even for the general fund portion.
Well, before even Councilmember Dominguez speaks, and I know he's interested in this issue and wants to move forward as fast as possible, like us. I think we're all saying we don't know how, but we think this is an obvious opportunity to save money and energy and be more environmentally sustainable. So I think it's on you to figure out the budget proposal for this year's budget that would make that happen. I don't think there's any resistance at all from us. So, and Councilmember Dominguez, I know you want to add something to this.
So what I'm not seeing is the overall cost of the program and what's the return on the investment to the city?
The overall cost of the program is, I think I had it on a slide there. Our FY17 budget was roughly $1.2 million, and that's just directly to cover utility bills. There's nothing else built into that. There's $1.06 million for FY17 to cover our electricity bills and $212,000 to cover our gas bills.
The 1.2 million, that's money going towards paying the bills, that's not staff?
That's directly allocated costs coming in from other programs to pay the utility bills.
So what is your staff budget?
We have a small program, an energy conservation program, and it's a program that also is fully funded by allocated costs. It's about $170,000, and it funds our energy analyst position salary and some overhead for the city's energy program.
And just to make sure I'm on the right page, when you say it's covered by allocated costs, you're saying different departments are paying part of it as a kind of an overhead?
Correct.
Let me just jump in there in terms of how it's funded. So as Mr. Wiltshire indicated, 2017 was the first year we rolled out this program. Prior to that, every single general fund department was paying their own utility bills, and they would budget accordingly. What we decided to do as a way to create this mechanism for funding is to establish a base amount that each department was going to be charged. So they weren't no longer going to be paying their bill based on what it was. We established an amount that would go forward with a CPI index, would always be on an upward trend. That money then gets transferred over to Mike and his staff, who actually pay the bills, but then they're concurrently doing energy projects that are hoping with the intention of lowering the actual cost of the bills, and that increment is what's funding the program. We seeded it with $25,000, and as you indicated, this year is expecting another $40,000 to $70,000 in savings from projects that they've implemented. So they're getting the gross amount from departments, and then they're able to take advantage of the savings from the actual cost of the bill as a result of these programs. And hopefully that over time will just start growing and growing in terms of an annual number, because these projects that they're implementing are ongoing, so those savings will be ongoing, whereas the charges to departments will be continually going up. I hope that helps in terms of background. So the amount of money we're talking
Absolutely.
about is $40,000 to $70,000 this year. It'll continue to grow, but that's the idea. You can certainly seed it with more, but we just seeded it with $25,000.
So, and I'm comparing slides 4 and 8, the two pie charts. So, streetlights is providing 48% of the allocated costs, and it's 16% of the city's energy. And I guess this slide's a little different because on page 4, because it doesn't have enterprise funds. And seems like from the other pie chart, about 66% of our energy is through enterprise funds.
That's correct.
So at this point, we put in the 25,000 in seed money, and we're collecting money and allocated costs from the departments, and that doesn't quite reach the discrepancy between what we're paying the utilities and what we're collecting. That gap is not yet paying the salaries of the program staff.
So separate from that, before this program was in place, this utility management program, we had energy staff, Mike and Alelia. Those were already being funded through other allocated costs from the facilities operations. So it's an internal service fund. It gets allocated across the organization, so that their staff time is already funded. This is just the piece related to the utility bills that we're now funding through an additional allocated cost.
So what would be the perceived return on investment, or is there a way to project that, or is it too variable to look at it that way? Because that would inform the council's opinion on what's the appropriate level of staffing. Obviously, if we're making 50% return on investment, we'd want to staff up very aggressively.
I wouldn't think I'll let Mike jump in, but I wouldn't think in terms of, percentage return. I would look at what's the payback. So if you have a project that costs you $50,000 and you're paid back in 3 years, then you're looking at what's the savings on each project. I imagine is unique in terms of the savings, but you enjoy those savings for the eternity of that project or that program. So I think I would look at payback as a measure of whether it's worthwhile and all that, and plus aligning with that with what's the cost. If it costs you $1 million, but it takes 20 years to pay it back, that's a different consideration than $100,000 that's paid back in 3 years.
So is payback the same as return on investment, or is it a different?
It's the payback is if you cost you $50,000, then how long will it take to get back to $50,000 through savings?
Okay.
So it's not a return on investment. It's just a payback. So did you break even? You're repaid with that project. Now you got savings beyond that.
Councilmember White.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just hearkening back to witnessing Mr. Dewey bringing into the Sustainability Committee projects. The ones that come to mind are the lights in the. Well, first of all, there were some that were just getting different rates for certain bills. I guess one of the pieces that was going on again 8 years ago was there were more bills than people even knew were happening. They were sort of hiding under rocks here and there, and that just herding all those bills into one place was a project at one point. And of course that now we're seeing that becoming centralized. And then to see the savings were just spectacular on some of these things. It really, some big improvements have been made. So now we're talking about the enterprise funds. It just seems like that's, yes, they're self-funding, and in particular with the waterfront, they're doing fine. However, why not attack that? And particularly, again, from the sustainability perspective, that's just a place where it's an area where I think that everybody celebrates it, and I really appreciate. I guess that's perhaps I'm hearing Mr. Dominguez's questions and concerns. There's a big thank you in order to staff to say you're onto something here, and thank you for doing that, and let's explore it further. We've had real success here over the last decade. And it sounds like we have another decade's opportunities right before us. So help us frame that and execute that going forward. This is good news.
Mr. Casey.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, thank you. I share the perspective of Councilmember White. This is something staff likes as well. It's why we came up with this kind of continued evolution of how we're trying to deal with our energy usage. What I'm hearing from the committee is a desire to try to see how we can kind of roll this model out into the enterprise funds as well. And so I think that direction is great. I think we're interested in that. I think our message back is it's not as simple as we'll have it all ready and teed up in a week when we come back with the Public Works budget. But, we'll put some thought in the next week about a method to try to take a crack at it, because we'd like to do it, and I think we would commit to doing it. Just not sure it's going to be an easy thing to come up with a program in a week to present to you.
That's fair. And I guess, one thing I'm thinking about is that perhaps this could be conceptualized as another capital project in the sense of maybe we trade off another capital project for this capital project because of the return on investment and the money that we save from that. And what we're really proposing, I think, is to accelerate that and capture those savings sooner by spending money sooner. And so obviously understanding that money is limited, we're going to have to choose what to spend it on, and this seems like a very good candidate. And it doesn't fit well into the capital program for the rest of the city in the sense that it's not on the same list because it's not thought of the same way, but I think it is similar. Mr. Smario?
Yeah, and I just could add, for the smaller dollar items, I think there is a fairly straightforward opportunity. For example, if we're looking at a $100,000 project that's got a 3 to 5 year payback, we could use general fund reserves for that, knowing that we're still going to get it back without an interest, for no interest charge, of course. It's just committing to the bigger projects, then you're going to, for that, have a longer term payback. If we're just hovering around policy reserves, do you want to dip into it by $1 million for the 20-year payback? But
right.
That's part of the kind of discussion, and see what projects are out there.
The other element in this conversation, too, I think, is the parallel track of consideration of community choice energy. And I think that changes the whole conversation in a very different way if we are going down a path of doing that as a municipality and having the resources of that as part of this equation, too. So I think there is a bridge here where we want to go as fast as we can, giving you the right kind of staffing to be able to do these low-hanging fruit things. And then that other the conversation, I think, probably makes this different and puts it into a different structure and gives us better financing capabilities for those longer-term projects separate from the general fund. So. Councilmember Dominguez?
And maybe a separate model to consider would be to do a consultant model. So I see, like with the airport, they're 10% of our electrical spend, so that's about $385,000 per year. If our cost was, for example, $100,000 either for a direct employee or a consultant, we'd only have to save 10%, which would be $38,000 for 3 years. We'd have a 3-year payback, if I understand payback correctly. And that seems to be like would be in the priority area. Seems like payback is just the inverse of return on investment. Even if they were only able to save 3% of the electrical cost, that would be a 10-year payback, which would still be worth it in my mind if they could do that. And I think if we could easily, if we had one employee working for a year at the $100,000 level, they could really enumerate some good savings at the airport. Same thing with the waterfront. It's 7%, so maybe a little less efficient, but their electrical spend is probably a little more diverse than the airport. But again, maybe even bundling those two together and having one person serving just those two agencies, it would be easier to allocate their costs because then there wouldn't be a general fund component. Or again, using a consultant would be very clean to charge those two departments, and potentially spending 2 years on $150,000 to really drop their electrical costs would make a lot of sense.
All right. Well, any other comments from committee?
Well,
Councilmember White?
It's been really exciting to watch this effort over the last 8 years, and this is a continuation of it. It's really the results are just they're money saved and greenhouse gases situation improved. It's just good it's a feel good thing all the way around, and so to the extent that we can afford to push it forward, it's a really good thing, and I appreciate the efforts that have been made as I say, for the last many years, and this is just a continuation of it. So,
thank you.
Thank you.
Kudos. We're adjourned.